The richest woman in the family was on her knees, scrubbing her own son's bathroom floor. Nobody in that big house knew who she really was. Margaret wore a plain gray uniform. Her hands, once soft from years of comfort, were now red from hot water and soap. She moved quietly through the halls of her son's home, carrying towels, wiping counters, staying out of sight. No one looked at her twice. That was exactly what she wanted. From the kitchen doorway, she heard voices from the dining room. Stop. She listened. She's only after his money, Soo-yeon said, her voice smooth and sweet, like poison dressed as concern. You need to open your eyes, Min-jun. That girl works in a coffee shop. She saw an easy way out, and she took it. Margaret's son said nothing. He just stared at his plate, tired and unsure. Margaret stood still in the shadows, a tray in her hands, her face calm. But behind her calm eyes, something sharp was building. She wasn't hiding her wealth. She was hiding why she'd come home. For months, Margaret had heard the same story from different mouths. Everyone said the same thing about Amara, the young woman her son loved. Everyone had an opinion. No one had proof. Margaret didn't build one of the biggest companies in the country by trusting rumors. She built it by watching closely with her own eyes, when no one knew she was watching at all. So she told her son she was traveling for business. Instead, she came home in secret, wearing a stranger's uniform, answering to a stranger's name. The staff had changed since she was last home. Nobody recognized her face. She was no longer the boss. She was just the maid. And that was exactly where she needed to be. Margaret picked the name Ada. It was simple, easy to forget. Nothing like the name printed on company buildings across 3 countries. She left behind everything that made her Margaret. No silk blouses. No car with a driver waiting outside. No assistant carrying her bags or opening doors before she reached them. She packed one small suitcase with plain clothes, the kind she hadn't worn since she was young and had nothing. Her husband knew the truth. He always did. He kissed her forehead before she left and said only one thing. Be careful, my love. He never asked her to stop. He knew better than anyone that once Margaret decided something, no one could talk her out of it. The staffing agency that placed her didn't know who she really was. To them, she was just Ada, a quiet woman looking for temporary work. She answered a few questions, filled out a simple form, and within days, she was standing at the back entrance of her own son's home, waiting to be let in by a housekeeper who had never met her before. Nobody blinked. Nobody looked twice. The staff had changed since Margaret last visited 2 years ago. New faces. New names. Not one of them had any reason to think the woman holding a mop was the same woman whose photo once appeared on the cover of a business magazine. Her first day, she was given a list of chores. Clean the guest rooms. Wash the linens. Set the table before dinner. Simple work. Tiring work. Work she hadn't done with her own hands in over 20 years. By evening her back ached. Her knees hurt from kneeling on hard floors. Her fingers were dry from the harsh cleaning soap. But she said nothing. She only smiled politely when spoken to, and stayed quiet the rest of the time, the way a good maid was expected to. She served dinner that first night, standing near the wall as the family ate, invisible in the way only a servant can be invisible. She watched her son laugh softly at something on his phone. She watched Soo-yeon speak sweetly to him, then turn cold the second he looked away. No one asked Ada a single question. No one wondered where she came from, or what she used to be, or why her hands moved with more grace than they should for someone doing this kind of work. That was the strange gift hidden inside her disguise. People stopped seeing her the moment they decided she didn't matter. And in that silence, Margaret could finally hear what her money and her name had always blocked out. The truth, spoken freely by people who thought no one important was listening. By the 3rd day, Ada understood the house better than most people who had lived there for years. She learned who to avoid. Soo-yeon was the first lesson. To Min-jun, she was warm, patient, always ready with a soft laugh or a gentle word of advice. But the moment he left the room, her voice changed. She snapped at the younger maids for small mistakes. She called Ada "you there" instead of learning her name. Once, she dropped a glass of wine on purpose, just to watch Ada clean it up on her hands and knees, and didn't even say sorry. Ada said nothing. She only nodded, cleaned the mess, and filed it away in her memory, the way she once filed away company reports. She watched the other relatives too. At a family lunch, one of Min Jun's cousins laughed about Amara behind her back, calling her the coffee girl like it was an insult instead of an honest job. Another aunt said Amara probably practiced smiling in the mirror, just to trap a rich man. They said these things freely, without lowering their voices, because they believed no one in the room mattered enough to repeat it. But not everyone in that house was cruel. There was an older housekeeper named Grace, who had worked for the family for almost 15 years. Grace was quiet but kind. On Ada's second night, when her hands were shaking from exhaustion, Grace handed her a cup of tea without being asked. "You're new," Grace said. "This family is not easy. But some of us try to survive it with kindness anyway." Ada asked her carefully what she meant. Grace looked around before answering, lowering her voice. "Suyan has been saying things about Miss Amara for months now. Long before you got here. Every week a new rumor. Strange if you ask me. Nobody works that hard to destroy someone unless they're hiding something themselves." Ada's hands stopped moving. That single sentence stayed with her long after Grace walked away. She began paying closer attention. She noticed Suyan's phone always buzzing with messages she quickly hid. She noticed how carefully Suyan timed her comments about Amara, always right before an important family event. She noticed how Min Jun, tired and busy with company work, never had the time or the energy to question any of it. Something about the pattern felt wrong. Rumors that spread that easily, that consistently, were rarely accidents. Margaret had spent her whole life reading people in boardrooms, watching for the small signs that revealed a lie hiding behind a smile. Now, standing quietly in her own son's kitchen, wearing an apron instead of a tailored suit, she felt that same instinct rising again. Someone in this house was working very hard to make sure Amara never got the chance to be seen clearly. And Margaret intended to find out why. Amara came by the house on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a small bag of pastries from the coffee shop where she worked. She always brought something small like that, never expensive, just a kind gesture from someone who didn't have much to give but gave it anyway. Ada was polishing silverware near the dining room when Amara walked in, and for the first time since arriving at the house, someone actually looked at her. "Hi, I don't think we've met," Amara said, smiling. "I'm Amara. You must be new here." Ada nearly forgot to answer. Nobody else in the house had bothered to introduce themselves. "Ada," she said quietly. "Yes, I just started." "Well, welcome," Amara said. "This place can feel a little cold sometimes. Let me know if you ever need anything." It was such a small thing to say. But Margaret, hidden inside the name Ada, felt it land somewhere deep. This was the woman the family called a gold digger. This was the woman Suyan warned her son about at every dinner. And here she was, the only person in the house who had asked Ada's name. Over the next few days, Amara kept doing small things nobody asked her to do. She helped clear plates after dinner, even though guests never did that in this house. She noticed when Ada looked tired and quietly brought her a glass of water without making it a big moment. Once, when another relative spoke sharply to Ada over a small mistake, Amara stepped in gently. "She's doing her best," Amara said. "We all make mistakes. No need to be harsh." The relative rolled her eyes and walked away. Amara didn't say anything else. She simply smiled at Ada like it was nothing, and went back to helping in the kitchen. Ada watched all of this closely, the way she used to watch new employees in her company, looking for who was genuine and who was only performing kindness for an audience. Amara wasn't performing. She had no idea Ada mattered. She had no idea anyone was watching at all. She was just being herself, kind in a house that rarely deserved it. That was the part that stayed with Margaret the longest. Amara wasn't kind to impress Min Jun's family. If anything, kindness had cost her here. It made her look weak in a house that respected power and money above everything else. But Margaret knew the difference between true kindness and performance. She had spent decades surrounded by people who smiled only when it served them. Amara's kindness served no one. It simply existed, quiet and steady, in a house that hadn't earned it. And slowly, without meaning to, Margaret began to understand exactly why her son had fallen in love with her. The trouble started with a phone call. Ada was folding towels in the laundry room when she heard Amara's voice, shaky and upset, coming from the hallway. Amara had stopped by after her shift, still in her coffee shop apron, her phone pressed to her ear. "They can't just raise the rent that much," Amara said. "I have 30 days. That's not enough time to find that kind of money." She hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Ada, watching quietly from the laundry room door, felt something twist inside her chest. The little coffee shop, the one Amara talked about with so much pride, the one she had built with years of saving and hard work. Now it was in danger, and nobody in this big house even knew. That same week, a new rumor moved through the family faster than the last one. Someone claimed they saw Amara having dinner with an older wealthy man at a quiet restaurant downtown. Soo-Yun brought it up at breakfast, her voice full of fake concern. "I'm only saying what I heard," she told Min-jun. "Maybe you should ask her yourself. People don't lie about things like that for no reason." Min-jun didn't ask Amara directly. Instead, he grew quiet. He stopped calling as often. When Amara visited the house that weekend, he barely looked at her. His mind clearly somewhere else, weighed down by doubt he didn't know how to explain. Amara noticed the change immediately. Margaret noticed it too. Nobody in the family stepped in to help Amara with the coffee shop. Nobody defended her against the rumor. So Ada did what a maid could do without drawing attention. She quietly asked around and learned which days Amara needed extra help at the shop. On her one free afternoon that week, Ada showed up and worked behind the counter, refusing to accept payment for her time. "You don't have to do this," Amara said, tired eyes full of gratitude. "I know," Ada said simply. "But you looked like you needed the help." Later, when Amara admitted she didn't know what to do about the rent, Ada offered calm, careful advice, the kind that came only from someone who had once run a company through hard times of her own. She suggested Amara speak to the landlord directly, ask for a short delay, and put everything in writing. Amara followed the advice, grateful, never once suspecting the woman helping her was worth more money than the entire building the coffee shop sat in. Margaret said nothing about who she really was. Not yet. She only watched her son pull further away from the one person who had never asked him for anything, and she felt her patience growing thin. Someone in that house wanted Amara gone. And Margaret was determined to find out exactly who, and why. That evening, Margaret was assigned to clean Min-jun's room while he was away at a company meeting. It was strange, standing in her son's private space as a stranger, folding his clothes, straightening his shelves, seeing pieces of his life he never shared with her directly. She noticed a stack of old books at the back of his closet, pushed behind a row of winter coats. Dust covered the top one. It looked like nothing had touched that corner in years. As she moved the books to clean underneath them, her hand brushed against something else. An envelope, old and slightly yellowed, tucked flat against the back wall of the closet, hidden where no casual glance would ever find it. Margaret's hands paused. The envelope was sealed, with no name written on the front. It had clearly been placed there on purpose, hidden the way people hide things they are afraid someone else might find. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, her heart beating a little faster than she expected. She thought of turning away, leaving it exactly where it was. It wasn't her place to search through her son's private things, even wearing another woman's name. But something about the way it was hidden, so carefully, so deliberately, told her this wasn't nothing. She slipped the envelope into her apron pocket, her hand steady even as her mind raced with questions. What was so important that Min-jun felt the need to hide it from everyone, even from himself, tucked away in the dark? She didn't open it. Not yet. Some part of her, the part that had built an empire on patience and timing, told her this needed to be read alone, somewhere safe, somewhere no one could interrupt. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Margaret sat alone in the small staff room, the envelope resting unopened in her lap. Whatever was inside, she understood one thing clearly. It was about to change everything. Margaret opened the envelope alone, under the dim light of the small staff room. Inside were old letters and bank papers, folded neatly, written in Soo-yeon's own handwriting. As Margaret read, her hands grew still. The papers showed a large debt Soo-yeon owed to the family, one she had never repaid. There were messages too, printed and saved, where Soo-yeon spoke openly about needing Min-jun to marry someone from a better family, someone who could help clear her debt in exchange for a future connection to the company. Amara was never the problem. She was simply in the way. Margaret read every page twice, her chest tight with anger she hadn't felt in years. Every rumor, every whisper, every cruel word said about a young woman who had done nothing wrong. All of it traced back to one person, protecting herself by destroying someone else. The next evening, the family gathered for a dinner Soo-yeon herself had arranged. One more chance to convince Min-jun to walk away from Amara. Margaret waited by the wall, as she had every night, silent and unnoticed, the envelope hidden inside her apron. Soo-yeon stood and spoke first, her voice smooth as always. Min-jun, I only want what's best for you. I've heard more troubling things about Amara. Maybe it's time you finally listened. Margaret stepped forward. She reached up and slowly removed the scarf from her head, letting her real hair fall free. The room went silent. Min-jun turned, confused, staring at the maid who suddenly didn't move like a maid at all. "Mother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Gasps moved around the table. Soo-yeon's face went pale. "I have been in this house for 2 weeks," Margaret said, her voice calm but firm, carrying the same authority she used in boardrooms all over the world. "Nobody noticed me. Nobody asked who I really was. But I saw everything. I heard everything." She placed the envelope on the table in front of Soo-yeon. "Including this." Min-jun opened it with shaking hands. As he read, his face changed from confusion to disbelief, then to quiet fury. "You did this?" he asked Soo-yeon. "All this time it was you?" Soo-yeon opened her mouth, but no excuse came out. There was nothing left to say. Margaret looked around the table at the family who had spent 2 weeks ignoring the woman with the mop and the tray, never once imagining she was the one person whose approval they had always tried to win. "You judged a woman for working an honest job," Margaret said quietly, "while one of you sat here lying to protect a debt you were too proud to admit." The room stayed silent, and for the first time everyone finally saw her clearly. The days after that dinner moved quickly. Soo-yeon was removed from every family account and every company matter within the week. Margaret didn't shout or threaten. She simply made a few quiet phone calls, and doors that once opened easily for Soo-yeon closed without warning. The debt she had hidden for so long finally came due, and this time, no one was there to protect her from it. Grace, the housekeeper who had shown Ada kindness on her hardest nights, was the first person Margaret called into her office once she returned to being herself. Grace stood nervously by the door, unsure why she had been summoned. "You didn't know who I was," Margaret said. "But you were kind to me anyway. That matters more than you think." She gave Grace a raise, a permanent position with real security, and thanked her personally for something most people in that house never bothered to offer a servant. Word spread quickly among the staff. For the first time in years, the household felt less like a place people simply survived, and more like a place they were seen. Margaret didn't stop there. She sat down with her son and reviewed carefully how decisions had been made in the family for far too long, based on whispers instead of facts, on appearances instead of character. "From now on," she told him, "we don't decide who belongs in this family based on rumors. We watch. We listen. We give people the chance to show us who they really are." Min-jun nodded, still shaken by how close he had come to losing someone good because he trusted the loudest voice in the room instead of asking questions himself. Margaret personally visited Amara's coffee shop that same week, no longer hiding behind an apron or a false name. She offered to help cover the rent increase, but only as an investment, not as charity, insisting Amara remain the owner and keep full control of her business. Amara, stunned to learn the quiet maid who once worked beside her was actually Min-jun's mother, could barely find the words to respond. "You didn't have to do any of that," Amara said. "The shifts, the advice, any of it. I wanted to see who you really were," Margaret said gently. "Not who people said you were." For the first time in weeks, Amara allowed herself to believe that maybe, finally, the truth had done what it was always meant to do. Had set things right. Min-jun found Amara at the coffee shop a few days later, sitting alone at a corner table after closing, wiping down the counter one last time before heading home. He sat across from her, quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "I should have trusted you," he said. "I let other people's words matter more than what I already knew about you. I'm sorry." Amara set down the cloth in her hand and looked at him carefully. "I understand why the rumors scared you," she said. "But I need you to know something. I don't want to be forgiven because a letter proved I was innocent. I want to be trusted because you know me. Those are two different things." Min-jun nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she meant. She wasn't asking to be cleared like a suspect walking free after a trial. She was asking to be believed, the way she should have been believed from the very beginning, long before any envelope was ever found. "You're right," he said. "You shouldn't have needed proof for people to treat you with respect. I won't make that mistake again." Amara reached across the table and took his hand, not because the truth had finally arrived, but because he finally understood why it should never have taken this long. Margaret watched their reunion from a distance, standing near the shop's window, dressed once again in her own clothes, wearing her own name. She thought about the past 2 weeks, the aching knees, the tired hands, the quiet nights folding towels in a stranger's house. She hadn't worn that disguise to test whether Amara was good enough for her son. She had worn it to see the truth clearly, without the noise of money and status getting in the way. And the truth, once she found it, was simple. Amara had never needed to change. She had never needed rescuing. She had only needed someone patient enough, humble enough to actually look. The disguise didn't decide who was worthy. It only proved who already was. If you've ever been doubted by people who never bothered to know you first, comment, "I understand her," because being underestimated is never the end of the story. Subscribe because Margaret and Amara's story isn't finished yet.